We know in the West, anyone who studies history, we know that in the West there is this kind of suspicion or even hatred and antagonism towards Islam and Muslims, going back to the Crusades and even earlier. Where do these meetings happen where Muslims are planning this thing? I've been involved in Islamic activity for 30 plus years. No one's invited me to this secret meetings. We see Keir Starmer attacking the Bangladeshi community. He says some filthy things about a lot of us here from the Bangladeshi community. And we can see, many laws and policies have been made, if you like, by the mainstream politicians, which target Muslims, see us as a suspect community. If you talk about أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So this topic, finding the right responses to far-right narratives, is obviously it's a huge topic, and there are many kind of branches to it, and maybe too much to cover in one evening, all those branches. But it's something I'm sure everyone is feeling in the society, is aware of in the society, regardless of which side you're in, whether you're on the left or the right or the middle or the minority or the majority, is something which is hard to ignore. And the brother just mentioned about Ramadan, and even in Ramadan, it was an issue. Apart from global events, we know some huge global events going on in Ramadan, but we had this prayer in Trafalgar Square. If you guys remember, it caused a bit of a controversy. Muslims were praying Tarawih in Ramadan in Trafalgar Square, and I think even the mayor was there. He was praying, and it caused a bit of a controversy. A Conservative MP, he attacked it and called it an act of domination, and that caused a lot of debate, and a lot of people came out to support him. A lot of people came out to attack him from the political field and the cultural fields. It was a controversy. And remember, many other things obviously have happened, but if you remember back in September, the Tommy Robinson, the march that was held, he was asking for 1 million people. But many estimates say it was from 100,000 to 150,000 people came from all over the country for that march. And they specifically, in that march, were many attacks on Islam and Muslims and Palestine. It received global coverage, and that's probably the hugest gathering of far-right people in this country's history. And over the last few years, there have been many big things like that. There was the riots in 2024, if you remember. This girls were killed or assaulted, and some fake news was put on that it was by a Muslim asylum seeker, and they created riots around the country. Mosques were attacked, and in that same week, hotels where asylum seekers were bombed, firebombed. There was a Muslim man who was stabbed. Many things happened in that week. So it's like riots across the country. So yeah, many things have happened. And there's a report in 2019, I'm saying 7 years ago, I found this report which was discussing, or the findings of that report was saying that a third of people in Britain saw Islam as a threat to British way of life. Not talking about 10%, a quarter, even 20%, a third of Brits saying that they perceived Islam as a threat to British way of life. And nearly a half, 47% of Conservative voters believed there was a conspiracy by Muslims. They believed in anti-Muslim conspiracies including no-go zones. Some areas in Britain, you can't go there. Muslims have taken over. That's half, nearly a half of conservative voters. And that's like 7 years ago. So imagine how, with all the propaganda, misinformation, how things might have moved on since then. Before I get started, I just thought, maybe just get a feel from the audience, from you guys, what you think those main, well, let's call out what you think these far-right narratives are. What are those ideas that are pushed out there? I just call them out. Listen, what ones are you aware of?
The oppression of women, like Muslims oppress women.
Muslims oppress women. Yeah, that's definitely one of those common tropes. Muslims want to take over with the Sharia, take over Britain with the Sharia. What else?
They keep jumping on the boats and hopping onto the channel.
They're invading by the boats. Invasion, yeah.
They're using
girls, grooming young girls. Sharia counts, yeah, the Sharia argument. Yeah, so trying to take over Britain. That's right. So these are, you're very right. These are some of the common Islamophobic far-right narratives. So in general, there's one which you didn't mention, which is about the demographic issue. And I don't know if you've heard about this great replacement theory. So that was another one. So yes, there's a demographic threat. The belief that Muslim immigration and the higher birth rates of Muslims having many children, will lead to a decline in the native population. And, just by numbers, Muslims will replace them, or that there's some actual conspiracy by Muslims to replace the native population. And this is an idea which a French author claimed in his work in 2011. But this idea has been actually around since a lot longer than that. And some other French writers back in the 60s also talked about this replacement theory. They actually, obviously France has had the hugest amount of Muslim population for North Africa for going back to the 1940s. And so that idea has been there for a long time. And at that time, those writers were saying that it's the left and the elites who are doing it, not the Muslims. It's a plan by the elites to replace their own population, or the leftists to replace their own population with migrants. So that's one of the narratives out there. Now, I don't know about you, like, where do these meetings happen where Muslims are planning this thing? I've been involved in Islamic activity for 30 plus years. No one's invited me to this secret meetings. Violence is another one. Maybe, I don't know if you guys mentioned, that Muslims are inherently violent, or their religion is violent, and they're all closet extremists. We should fear them all. That's another narrative that is there. You mentioned the Islamicization, Sharia. A lot of the American politicians, far-right politicians and right politicians, have claimed that Britain is run by the Sharia has taken over Britain. These are one of the narratives. And yes, the issue of oppressing women, Muslims oppress women. You see that often, that argument being made. So all these stereotype and misrepresentations in the media, by the politicians, by the far-right groups, and other elements of the society, add to an atmosphere where Muslims are really under a lot of pressure, if you're aware, and leads to a lot of discrimination against Islam and against Muslims. And we can see, many laws and policies have been made, if you like, by the mainstream politicians, which target Muslims, see us as a suspect community. If you talk about the Prevent program, treats all Muslims as guilty until proven innocent. We've had children as young as 2 and 3 reported to the Report program. All sorts of strange and bizarre behavior. So Muslims are not are discriminated against. And the irony is the far right are bringing arguments that the white natives people are the ones who have been discriminated against. So yeah, we are in this kind of strange reality. So what's the context? What's the background? I think that's worth talking about. What's the root causes of these far right narratives, which are becoming increasingly mainstream? Yeah, they're becoming mainstream. So we say far right, and it kind of makes you think, well, it's these people on the fringe of society. But we see that now there are many media channels which are mainstream. These GB News and these other channels, which millions of people are watching, and these narratives have become mainstream. We see the mainstream politicians making Islamophobic and making hateful remarks about Muslims, and Boris Johnson, he said that Muslim women, they look like they have bin bags on or letterboxes. That was it. Then he came into power. We see Keir Starmer attacking the Bangladeshi community. He says some filthy things about a lot of us here from the Bangladeshi community. He attacked the Bangladeshi community. So it's in the mainstream. It's not in the fringes or the far right. It's become mainstream open season on Islam and Muslims. And things don't seem to be getting any better. So it's worth understanding the context and what are the kind of contributory or the causal lines that are leading to this situation. So I'm going to mention, there are many causes, right? But I'm going to mention a few which I think are really important. First is that we know in the West, anyone who studies history, we know that in the West there is this kind of suspicion or even hatred and antagonism towards Islam and Muslims, going back to the Crusades and even earlier. But I think, that's always there. I don't think it really helps to investigate that too much for this particular era or generation we're in. But it is there, it's always been there. I think the biggest thing, and I'll talk about four things. I think one of the second thing, and probably the most important thing, is the economic situation. Yeah, the economic situation in the West is not good for the masses, I would say. So if you look at that timeline, the end of the Cold War back in the early 90s, the fall of the Soviet Union, the fall of communism or socialism, it was like a kind of rosy period for the West. And you had this period of globalization, and America and the Western and Europe thought they reigned supreme. They defeated socialism and communism. But pretty soon, afterwards, we see that they didn't have this kind of enemy that they were struggling, or opponent they were struggling against. And 9/11 happened in the beginning of the millennium, and Islam and Muslims became the new kind of enemy or opponent that the West felt they need to struggle against. But in particular, in our generation, we can often cite 9/11. There was the financial crash, which I'm going to talk about. It's an economic reason, in 2008, which maybe some of our younger brothers won't remember that. But 2008, there was a massive international, global financial crisis, and there was what do they call it? The economies went into recession. Sorry, the word just stopped my lips. It went into recession globally, and it's not surprising. And I think there's a connection that the year after, so that was in 2008. In 2009, what organization was formed? The EDL. The EDL was established in 2009.
They came straight to Haram.
So yeah, we live in London. We live in London. We experience these things. They came to. I remember they came to Regent's Park one Eid day. So there's a connection. There's a connection between these things, and a lot of this far right stuff. The argument, what we'd argue is that it's manufactured. They're just not organically suddenly appeared. There are forces behind some of these organizations. Everyone knows, it's been exposed many times, Tommy Robinson, he's receiving money from some of these Gulf states, shockingly, Muslim countries sponsoring far right. Nigel Farage, there's also been suspicion on him for getting influence from the Gulf states as well. He definitely got money from Elon Musk. So this is not a UK phenomenon. It's happening across Europe. It's happening across North America. But the issue, what we're saying is that in a financial crisis, who was responsible for financial crisis? The bankers. It was a crisis in the banking system. And the banks got bailed out. They got bailed out by trillions and trillions of dollars and pounds of people's money, taxpayers' money. And in order to deflect the attention from them, and in order to, the bankers were the most hated people, if people remember to that time. They were the most hated people. And people thought there was going to be reform of capitalism. The economic system is going to be reformed. I remember there was a very famous placard. It said, in those protests, where people said, bail out the people, not the banks. Because millions of people, in fact, hundreds of thousands of people became homeless because the banks repossessed their homes. They were not able to pay those dodgy loans, mortgages. They were ended up on the streets. So people say, look, this public money is going to save the banks and the people are on the street. So to deflect this attention, the elites, the ruling classes, the establishment, the politicians, it's very easy for them to make the people not look at themselves, but look at those below them. Blame the migrants, blame the foreigners, blame the brownies. It's a very easy tactic to divide and rule. So, so I think that I would argue that economics is a huge factor in the rise of the far right, of populism and populist politicians. Another factor, which is linked to that economics, is the inequalities in society. We know during after the financial crisis, in the decade afterwards, there was one of the hugest transfer of wealth from the many to the few. People talk about the 1% who own more wealth than the next 50%. It's different in each country, but in America and Britain, it's the inequality in wealth is huge. There's a divide between the North and the South. And we shouldn't dismiss people's concerns. The native, if you like, English people, the working classes, many of them have been left behind. If you travel up and down the towns and cities in the north, you see that many of them are impoverished. Yeah, Britain's not working for them. They've been left behind, and they feel disenfranchised. So they are looking for someone to blame. And then came along Brexit. Yeah, Brexit was supposed to solve all their problems, but it didn't. But it was useful for the politicians to deflect the inability of the economics, the capitalist system, to actually solve these problems, to reform itself. It's easy to blame Brexit, to blame foreigners, to blame, as one of the brothers mentioned, people coming over on the boats as the problem. And every night you will see mainstream television, you will see programs about the poor, about fare dodgers. Last night I was watching TV, it's a whole program about fare dodgers. Where is the programs about tax dodgers? Yeah, they talk about Muslim grooming gangs, where the world has been run by the biggest paedophile ring in history. The Epstein class, where the royals of the British family are involved in paedophile rings. Leaders across the world are, many of the politicians in America, the leaders of the world, seem to be implicated in those files, which we're not getting proper access to. So it's very useful. So the issue of, if you like, the divide between rich and poor, those who are at the top of society increasingly accumulating the wealth, and the divide between those classes becoming greater and greater. It leads to a lot of dissatisfaction and anger and people looking for answers and people to blame. So there is that context which the economic situation has compounded. And the other thing to say, another big cause is, if you follow the news, is the Zio faction, I would call it. They are and increasingly being exposed as a big cause of Islamophobia or Islamic hatred towards foreigners and Muslims. They've been sponsoring a lot of and supporting a lot of these activities behind the scenes. So yeah, we see that Tommy Robinson, he was trained in the in media in Israel. So there's these connections, and there's a lot of money, Zionist money, Zio faction money going into and behind a lot of this, if you like, anti-Islamic tropes and hatred and activities. All the actions we've seen against Palestine, activism, a lot of it is coming from that Zio faction. So I think there might be more, and you might want to raise others, but these are some of the four main kind of contributors to the situation we're in. So what do we do about it? That's the are we a threat? Is there reality to these narratives? Are they true? Obviously, maybe not obviously, maybe some Muslims believe they're true. I hope not. I saw online this guy who's a Bangladeshi Zionist, proud. You've seen that guy, yeah. So there are these odd bods out there. There's a guy, one of the leading guys in Farage's party, who's from a Muslim background. So we have these odd bods. But I think in general, we would say none of these things are true. They're misinformation. They're manufactured things. But the issue is this issue is not going away. Does anyone here believe that things are going to get easier? Or, we just need to be patient and it will go away? It doesn't seem that way, right? We have this politics going on. The brother mentioned we've got local elections coming up in a couple of weeks. So there's a lot of pressure on Muslims to engage. The last 2 weeks running in my local mosque, the Imam has been kind of pushing heavily that people should vote, they need to take part, they need to do something. There is this climate, you need to fight for your interests, you need to vote and take part. We see the rise of this Green Party, which is attracting a lot. There's a Muslim guy in there, one of their leaders. And then there's this Reform Party, which now is rising, the Farage Party. And the latest poll in Wales has shown that the Reform Party might win in Wales, might be Plaid Cymru, which is the main Welsh party. That's shocking. So, that they could take control of one of the regional governments in Britain. So it's not something which seems like it's going to go away. It's something you can't ignore. It's something it's going to come home, and it's going to affect us if it hasn't affected us already, increasingly. So we've got to do something about it, or we have to engage with it. We can't ignore it. And of course, we would say that these narratives are not true. Islam is, there is no plot to demographically take over, population-wise, take over Britain. There's no Sharia taking over Britain by Sharia. All these things are, the misrepresentation of how Islam oppresses women. All these things, we have counter narratives which we need to study, or counter arguments, I say. We need to study those things. But today, there's three main areas if you think about solution-wise. There's the response of the community, if you like, leadership, the masajid, the institutions, the groups, the Islamic centers. There needs to be a response and a strategy and an idea of how to tackle or how to engage with this climate we're in. Also from the Islamic activists, the du'at, the Islamic thinkers. There's a role for them to play in engaging in this climate. We have to. There's no way we can avoid that. But I think also there is a part to play for the average Muslim, the masses. And I think that's often, I've done quite a bit of thinking on this recently. And I don't really have a complete answer. Usually you give a talk and you say Islam says this and this is the answer. I'm afraid this isn't one of those topics. It's a topic which needs a lot more thinking on to develop, it needs to be developed what our answer is to this climate we're in. Obviously, there's the counter-narrative work. How do we attack those ideas? I think that's quite clear how we can do that. But in terms of how, in the broader sense, in the society, how do our institutions, our masajid, our centers, what role do they play in trying to challenge or create a better atmosphere of these things? And what role can average Muslims play? I'll say that's the third area, which I think I wanted to talk a little bit about today before Q&A. So the other thing, just forgot to mention, it's in the interests of those elite, to keep people looking down at those below them. And they might perceive the immigrants and the Muslims and the foreigners as those below them. Get those people are disenfranchised amongst the native Brits. Get them looking at the people who they think are below them, or the foreigners or the outsiders. So the point is that there is a place for counter narratives and counter arguments, but I think there's also a space for creating new narrative, more like a solution rather than the counter argument space, if that makes sense. So, and this is not a new reality. I think I was going to mention that this is something Muslims experienced throughout history, and something happened in the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba in the early days of Islam. So I just want to talk about a story of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. In the Meccan era, in the early days of Islam in Mecca, and the Quraysh, they were the elites of the time. They were the ones who ruled Mecca, and they were the leaders of Arabia. And they saw Islam as a threat. And they didn't want to see Islam in public. They wanted to silence Islam. And they created many propagandas against Islam and Muslims. They want to destroy your families. They were the terrorists of the day, the Muslims. And they couldn't tolerate also, they came to a stage that they couldn't tolerate public shows of Islam. So how, like I mentioned, those brothers joined during Ramadan, this attack on Muslims praying in Trafalgar Square and call it an act of domination. Really, what they fear is, our prayer is not an act of domination. It's an act of submission. We are humbling ourselves before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How can prayer be, how can it be twisted and made to say it's an act of domination? It's an act of submission. But the Quraysh also feared seeing the prayer. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he used to pray in public. He used to pray around the Kaaba in the public places. And the Quraysh, they got angry at this because many people, they were amazed and interested. It was a spectacle to see the Muslim prayer. When non-Muslims haven't seen the Hajj and you show them a video or a clip of the Hajj, they're amazed. There's no religion has this powerful symbol, the Salah of Muslims. So Abu Bakr was annoyed the Quraysh. They would get angry because they saw people getting attracted to Islam by watching Abu Bakr pray in public. So they told him, don't pray in public. Just like this conservative MP, the Quraysh said, don't pray in public. And got to such a stage, there was the hijrah from Mecca. The Muslims migrated. The Muslims who felt they couldn't tolerate the situation, the oppression in Mecca, they made a hijrah. 2 hijras to Abyssinia. Abu Bakr actually, he just on his own, he decided he got fed up with the situation, he couldn't tolerate it anymore. He said, I'm going to make hijrah myself, by himself. He didn't go in the group, the 2 groups. And he left Makkah with his family, and he was traveling, traveled 5 days out of Makkah. So quite far, he got quite far. And he bumped into, and I don't know if you're aware of this story, he bumped into a noble of Makkah. So he's, a noble tribesman. His name was Abu Dughana, yeah? And he's asking him, where are you going, Abu Bakr? And Abu Bakr started telling him, look, the situation in Makkah is very bad. They won't let me practice my faith. So I'm going to travel in the land and worship Allah. And Aisha narrated this story actually, radiallahu anha. And then what was the interesting thing is what Abu Dughana, Ibn ad-Dughana, sorry, what he said was, he made a statement about Abu Bakr. And I think we really need to think about this. Yeah, I think it's really important for us to take a lesson from this. So he said, look, yeah, Abu Bakr, he said, look, someone of your rank and character does not leave and should not be forced to leave. For indeed, you provide for the needy, you enjoy the ties of family relations, you support the weak, you honor your guests, and you help others to rise above the vicissitudes of life. I then will provide you with protection, return and worship your Lord in your homeland. So he offered Abu Bakr protection. You remember in the tribal society, if you don't have someone protecting you, you're finished. But look at the amazing testimony, witness he gave about Abu Bakr. He's saying that you're an outstanding citizen. You're an outstanding human being. You help people. You keep relations. You're a very good person and you help people. You're an outstanding citizen. People look at you as an example, as a model of being a good person for the society, not just an individual. I just want to reflect, right? As individuals, I'm not talking about the institutions or the du'at. Our issue is not to, if we get into a battle, Islam against the far right, yes, there needs to be some counter narratives, but we can't have the whole of the Muslims in this battle. That's not the solution. The solution must be something better, an alternative, right? Something good that we're presenting to society. And look, Gaza and even Iran, there's miraculous things, I think, which are happening. They are kind of miraculous in a way, about how many people are opening their eyes about many of these myths and lies and misconceptions about Muslims and Islam. How many people have become Muslim through this, seeing this genocide in Gaza? How many people watching this thing, Iran, realize that Iran is not this enemy that we've been given this propaganda about all these decades? It's America who's the aggressor. It's the Zionists who are the aggressors. Iran is just trying to defend itself. So many, the wool is being uncovered from many people's eyes. And so too, many of these misconceptions about Muslims, we have to uncover the people's eyes about it. And the way to do that is a positive and proactive approach. Rather, there's one field of work, which is the counter work, the counter narrative work. But there's also, for the masses of Muslims, I think there's a lot of work to do in terms of thinking about positive engagement, but not just being an ordinary citizen. But many people are, I'm just getting on with my life, trying to follow Islam as much as I can. I'm just getting on with my business as an individual. The problem is that stance is not really going to help in the situation we're in. What you actually need is everyday Muslims, the millions of Muslims in Britain, to actually think. You have to be more than that. You have to look at Abu Bakr as the example. He's a man who wasn't just being an individual, me, myself, and I, getting on with his business. He was proactively helping people in society. He was engaged in society. He was respected in society. So we can't actually carry on just getting on with our own business. We actually, everyday Muslims, need to think proactively about how they can help be part of the solution and doing something positive. It's not, the ordinary Muslim is not going to get involved in Islamic work necessarily, or activism, or counter-narrative work. But there needs to be some, because the majority of the Muslims, that 4 million plus Muslims, there's got to be something they can do to be part of the solution. So this is something we can probably explore in the Q&A in terms of solution-wise and the way forward. And not only Abu Bakr, a few more things I'm just going to say before we close. Not only Abu Bakr is the example, the Prophet ﷺ, he's the ultimate example. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentioned in Surah Al-Ahzab that the Prophet ﷺ, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, about the Prophet ﷺ, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهَ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرَ وَذَكَرَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا. That indeed in the Prophet ﷺ, you have the best of examples. That Muhammad ﷺ is the ultimate example. And that is something every Muslim in the millions of Muslims can adopt, to take the Prophet ﷺ as example, how he conducted himself in society, how he was active in society. Before even the prophethood, he was active in the society, he was trusted in the society, he earned the title Al-Amin, the trustworthy. And the other issue is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it doesn't allow us to just be individuals and get on with my own life and try to ignore the society and the issues going on around us. Allah encouraged us to take part in the common good. In the beginning of Surah Al-Ma'idah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, At-ta'awanu ala al-birri wa taqwa. Cooperate. وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى. Cooperate in al-bir, in good, and in piety. So it's something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us to actually cooperate and be active and take part in good. And there's also the idea in Islam of enjoining good and forbidding evil. So we can't really have an idea. Islam encourages us not to have that individualistic idea. We need to be part of taking part in the solutions. So we can talk more about that. It's time for prayer. In the Q&A after prayer. جزاك الله خير وقولي قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي.